Comic book people out there, there's a storyline called A Lonely Place of Dying. This is the first story where we're introduced to Tim Drake. It's not the first appearance of Tim Drake. Tim Drake came out in issue number 436 of Batman way back in 1989. But that issue was much more focused on Nightwing and more of a flashback. In issue number 440 was the first part to a storyline called A Lonely Place of Dying. This is the first storyline that encompasses around Tim Drake and focuses on him and how he became the next Robin. I did another video review on a storyline called A Death in the Family, just kind of putting that over here in case you're interested in watching that. That is a precursor and started the domino effect to where Tim Drake was going to be introduced into the whole Batman family. A Lonely Place of Dying was written by Marv Wolfman and co-written by George Perez, who also helped out with some of the artwork in the Teen Titan issues. And the first part to this story, which is Batman number 440, the reader is seeing that Batman's being much more dark and much more impulsive in his actions. This is a result from Jason Todd dying. We're also introduced to an unknown guy who's trying to track down Dick Grayson. He goes to the Teen Titans and runs into Starfire. But the reader doesn't know who that is until the next part of the storyline, which is the new Teen Titans issue number 60. And this is where Tim Drake meets Dick Grayson for the second time. He explains that they met years earlier, back when Dick Grayson was still performing with the circus. We also see that Tim Drake figured out the identity of both Batman, Jason Todd, and Dick Grayson as being Batman, Robin, and Nightwing. Tim Drake had been trying to track Dick Grayson down to try to convince him to go back to being Robin again so that Batman would have a partner. Batman's actions were showing that he was becoming much more dark and he needed another partner in order to keep him balanced. At this point, being that Dick Grayson had moved on and become Nightwing, he made it clear that he wasn't going to be his partner again, but he will help Batman out. During this storyline, Batman was going through a completely different plot that had to do with Two-Face, which is very fitting that Two-Face was chosen for the origin story for Tim Drake, being that he was involved not only in Dick Grayson's origin story, but also in Jason Todd's as well. But in this time around, Tim Drake didn't have anywhere near as much hatred and animosity towards Two-Face as opposed to what Jason had. The storyline doesn't end in some big dramatic thing. In fact, it's almost something that's very small in comparison to a lot of other Batman stories that have been written. Tim Drake doesn't immediately take up the mantle of Robin. He does put on the former costume of Jason Todd in order to help out Batman and Nightwing, but it's very briefly. It's clear that Batman is impressed with Tim, but he's also not willing to have a third partner yet. Tim is the exact opposite of what Jason Todd was. Jason Todd was much more impulsive, he was much more reckless, and he didn't listen to orders. Tim Drake, on the other hand, thought everything through. He was very intelligent, and he listened to Batman very, very closely. So it was pretty obvious that his character was written so that the readers could identify with him and not hate him immediately and reject him like they did with Jason Todd. In my humble opinion, I thought this was a really well-written origin story. It wasn't like we were forced to like this new character. We slowly got to be introduced to him, and we got to see his training along the way before he fully took up the mantle of being Robin. It wasn't until Batman number 457 when Tim took up the full mantle of being Robin. But this wasn't the end of his training, this was the beginning of his real training. I'll do another video on that at another time. When I started reading comic books, I only knew Tim Drake as being Robin. I didn't know about Dick Grayson, and I didn't know about Jason Todd. I'd heard certain stories here and there that was referenced in the Batman comic books, but I didn't know that they existed. It wasn't until years later that I started reading back issues and I read the stories on how one Robin died and another Robin grew up and became his own superhero. Plus, I also related a lot to Tim Drake. He was somewhat like a nerd, which I was totally a nerd, but I also liked the idea that he wasn't the strongest out of the Robins. He probably wasn't the best fighter out of them, but by far he was probably the most intelligent. And he made up for his physical weakness by being much smarter than a lot of other characters, so much so that Batman was very impressed with him. But I'll stop talking about this. I could probably talk about Tim Drake for hours. The storyline takes place in issues numbers 440 to 442 in Batman, and the new Teen Titans issues numbers 60 and 61. But that's it for now. Thank you guys for joining me in this comic book review. Be sure to check out my Patreon site, my social media sites, my websites, and everything else out there. Peace, love, namaste, and I'll see you guys later. Peace. Tim Drake's new costume in the New 52 is very reminiscent of his original costume that was unique to him when he was introduced in Batman number 457. I know they're trying to bring back a lot of characters to their roots, but that's not really a Red Robin costume. That's just a Robin costume. Although I really wish they would make him Robin again, but that's just my own personal opinion.